Chapter 1: The Future That Nobody in the West Predicted. There is a peculiar habit in the modern Western imagination. It treats China as though it is new, newly powerful, newly ambitious, newly dangerous, newly relevant. The story is told as if China has burst onto the world stage like a surprise guest at a private dinner party, loud, unexpected, slightly unwelcome. The narrative is familiar. A vast nation of 1.4 billion people rises from poverty, industrializes at astonishing speed, and now threatens to overturn the international order built after the Second World War. This story has been repeated so often that it feels instinctively true. Politicians repeat it, newsrooms amplify it, think tanks package it, citizens absorb it. It becomes the default shape of the world. But this narrative contains a distortion, a quiet distortion, one so profound that it reshapes everything built upon it. China's rise is not the anomaly of our age. China's absence was. For most of recorded history, China was not a challenger to global civilization. It was one of its central engines, measured not in election cycles, but in centuries. China's return to economic centrality is not unprecedented. It is a reversion, a return to the historical mean. If we step back far enough, the modern world looks less like a permanent Western triumph and more like a brief interlude in a much longer Eurasian story. For roughly 2,000 years, China was either the largest economy on earth or among the very largest. Only in the last 2 centuries, and I blink in civilizational time, did China fall from that position. That decline, so often treated as the normal China in Western memory, was the exception, the interruption. The last 2 centuries were not the pattern. They were the anomaly. And now, the anomaly appears to be ending. That is the premise of this book. Not that China will take over the world, as sensational headlines suggest. Not that conflict is impossible. History punishes those who assume destiny is automatic. Empires collapse. Systems decay. Great powers overreach. Wars begin by accident, not intention. But if catastrophic war is avoided, and if China continues along its visible trajectory, then the 21st century may be remembered as the era when the world quietly pivoted back toward its ancient center of gravity. The startling thing is not that China might lead. The startling thing is that we ever assumed it wouldn't. The Western lends a short memory problem. The modern West suffers from a peculiar blindness. It mistakes the last century for the whole of history. In many Western countries, the mental timeline runs like this: Greece, Rome, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the World Wars, America. Everything else becomes background. Important perhaps, but peripheral. China, in this compressed story, is reduced to fragments. Emperors, silk, dynasties, famine, Mao, factories, cheap exports, skyscrapers, and then suddenly artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, quantum computing, a navy sailing far beyond East Asia. The confusion comes from selective memory. China is imagined as either ancient and stagnant or modern and threatening. It is rarely understood as what it truly is: a civilization that rebuilds after collapse, absorbs foreign ideas without surrendering identity, re-emerges with coherence. Western observers assume China is improvising a rise. In reality, China is resuming a role it has played before. It is not behaving like a newcomer. It is behaving like a civilization that remembers what centrality feels like, the century that warped perception. To understand the surprise, we must understand the lens. From the early 1800s through the late 1900s, the West held overwhelming advantage. It dominated the global economy, technology, finance, trade routes, cultural prestige. Industrialization created vast productivity gaps. Western armies possessed weapons that turned resistance into catastrophe. After the Second World War, the United States emerged with a reach no previous empire could match. And during that same period, China was weak, divided, exploited, humiliated. This was the China the West became accustomed to, a wounded giant, an object of pity or dismissal. But that image was never permanent. It was a snapshot, taken at the worst moment of a long civilization. It was like meeting a marathon runner while they were lying injured on the road, and concluding they were not a runner at all. What has occurred since the late 20th century is not merely the rise of a developing nation. It is the healing of a civilizational rupture, the Great Return. China's transformation is often called a miracle, but miracles are what people call events they do not understand. China's rise is astonishing, but it is not mystical. It is the result of policy, discipline, long-term planning, national cohesion, and an intense cultural focus on education and endurance. In only a few decades, hundreds of millions lifted from poverty, infrastructure built at staggering scale, megacities constructed like engines of productivity, global supply chains reshaped. China became the world's manufacturing workshop, and increasingly its laboratory, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing, renewable energy, space technology. To some, this seems alarming. To others, inspiring. To many, confusing. But to China, it is not confusing at all. To China, this is normal. Not arrogance, historical memory. For centuries, China's economy, administration, and technological innovation were admired and feared across Eurasia. Paper making, printing, the compass, gunpowder, sophisticated governance, engineering feats that astonished distant travelers. China was not behind by nature. The industrial era temporarily shifted advantage westward, but the deeper structure of history always contained the possibility of return. Now that possibility is becoming reality, and the world is not ready for what it implies. The psychological earthquake. There are economic shifts, and there are civilizational shifts. An economic shift changes numbers. A civilizational shift changes meaning. If China becomes the largest economy, the leading technological innovator, the central node of global trade, it will not merely alter GDP rankings. It will alter how billions understand power, legitimacy, progress, the future. The shock will not be material. It will be psychological. For 2 centuries, the West has been the reference point. It defined modern education, modern governance, modern finance, modern aspiration. Even when destructive, Western systems carried the aura of inevitability. Now imagine a world in which that aura fades. A world in which Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen are seen as cities of the future. A world in which Mandarin becomes a language of contracts, engineering, and opportunity. A world in which trade flows reorganize, not around the Atlantic, but across Eurasia and the Pacific. This is not fantasy. It is the logical extension of visible trends. The true change is not that China becomes powerful. The true change is that the world begins to orbit differently. The rebalancing. The 19th and 20th centuries were an era of Western dominance. They produced extraordinary wealth and scientific progress. They also produce colonial extraction, ideological wars, conflicts of astonishing brutality. The 21st century may not erase those legacies, but it may rebalance the world away from them, not through perfection, not through utopia, but through a shift in the civilizational center of gravity. A world in which China is once again the largest economy is not unthinkable. It is the historical pattern reasserting itself. If we accept that, then the real question is no longer whether China will rise. The real question is, what kind of century will it be? When that rise is complete, that is the journey this book begins. And like all journeys, it starts by turning the map around